Morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Scottsdale, Arizona. This is the headquarters of Global Chamber. I've got two of our speakers here today, and we have one speaker in beautiful Washington, D.C. And so today we're talking about a sad subject that is part of business, unfortunately, and that is fraud and really how to avoid it. And so all of us, whether we're focused in on our own country or whether we're doing business across countries, we run into this. And so what are some of the things that people are doing today to defraud you? What are some of the things that you can do to avoid it? That's what we'll be talking about today with our experts. And we've got three amazing people. I know quite well our first speaker, Bill Papazian. We've known each other probably for about 10 years. He does amazing work in doing background checks for companies as they move into new markets, and he's done a tremendous job with that for, he's been in the profession for 30 years. And so really appreciate Bill as a member of Lightstone Solutions. He's CEO and founder, and today he's going to be talking about due diligence on international business partners and major customers in order to avoid Foreign Corrupt Practices Act liability. Bill, take it away.
Thank you, and it's great to be here with my fellow speakers. Yes, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a U.S. law that, very succinctly can be said to be an anti-bribery statute. And it still kind of startles me how many people I run across in international business that either don't know about the law or somehow think it doesn't apply to them, or they don't take it as seriously as they should. And just as an opener, I'm here to say that this law is as serious as it gets, and it's something that you must take very, very seriously if you're doing business internationally. It's the principles behind the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which are essentially that you cannot bribe somebody to get business or to get increased business. Those principles now extend to other countries that have similar laws, like the UK Bribery Act. Brazil's got laws, Singapore's got laws, Australia's got laws, China's got laws. That over the last 10 years, that type of behavior is going to get you in trouble in a lot of jurisdictions. And as I'll tell you in a moment, it's really big trouble. So we could probably spend a week talking about the entire act, but today I am going to concentrate more on the due diligence requirements, because part of an effective Foreign Corrupt Practices Act compliance program is to really know who you're doing business with. And if, God forbid, you do run into a problem with the Department of Justice or the SEC with respect to something that might have happened, one of the things they're going to definitely look at is, what kind of compliance did you have? And it doesn't mean if you have a good compliance program, you may still have problems, but if you don't have a compliance program, the problems become multiple-fold. In terms of who, as I said, a lot of international businesses don't seem to understand as much as they should about whether this law applies to them. And so, in the simplest terms, the law applies to everybody. It applies to all companies, whether they're private or public. It applies to all employees of those companies. It applies to the directors and the officers, the owners. And the agencies that enforce the FCPA primarily are the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, OFAC, which we've probably all heard of, which is the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, as well as the Department of Commerce and the Department of State. The law has been around since the early 1970s and really had very few prosecutions in its early history, but on a post-9/11 world, I think that our federal authorities realized they had this very powerful tool at their disposal that they could use to root out corruption, to root out terrorism financing and things like that. And so I will tell you that over the last 10 years, the FCPA enforcement actions have been of just a tremendous proportion, and Penalties, I mean, you see it almost every other day in the paper, companies being hit with penalties that are either approaching or in excess of $1 billion. Sometimes they're hundreds of millions of dollars. You're seeing people going to jail for significant periods of time. And again, in a nutshell, that is what the FCPA covers. As I indicated, one of the things that's looked at, if you do have an FCPA problem, is to have a solid compliance program. And part of that, without a doubt, has to do with due diligence on your foreign partners. And on a historical basis, and this comes right from the DOJ, the DOJ's and SEC's Foreign Corrupt Practices Act enforcement actions demonstrate that third parties such as agents, consultants, and distributors are commonly used to conceal the payment of bribes to foreign officials in international business transactions. So, you know, putting it in the vernacular, you know, you're going to do business in a certain country, and you've got a guy there, and the guy is connected, and you're now going to pay him, you know, $500,000 a year for those connections. But meanwhile, you don't really know what he does for you, other than somehow you seem to get business. You don't know what he does with parts of that $500,000 a year you're paying him. These are the types of things that raise red flags, and these are the types of people you have to look at. Risk-based due diligence is very important with third parties, and is absolutely looked at by the DOJ and the SEC when they assess the effectiveness of your program. The degree of the appropriate due diligence could vary based on the industry you're in, the country you're operating in, the size and nature of the transaction, the historical relationship with the third party, and basically it's not a one-size-fits-all. So you don't have to do on every single business partner a huge deep dive of due diligence, but it just depends. It depends what country are you operating in. Are you operating in a country that's known for corruption? Are you operating in an industry that has a lot of corruption issues, a lot of bribery issues? How big is the contract? You know, again, if this is one of your major contracts, you better be doing a lot of diligence. If it's just a very small contract and in a low-risk industry and a low-risk country, you still need to do due diligence, but it might not be quite as comprehensive. As far in terms of what you need to know, you need to understand, for example, what is the role of the third party, the consultant. That could also be, for example, an accountant or a lawyer that's being employed in another country, or a lobbyist. What is their role? What are they doing for you? How much are you paying them for that? Is what you're paying them reasonable? These are the kinds of things you need to look at as you determine how much, first of all, whether the relationship itself raises red flags, and even if it doesn't, whether you need to take a good look at who is this person that you're working with, and why are they coming on board with you. Same might be true with a distributor. You know, if you're going to be distributing product through a distributor somewhere overseas, you're going to want to know who that is, and why are they so successful? Why do you want those guys? And you need to know something about the owners, and you need to know something about the company itself. Again, payment terms. You know, is everybody else paying, you know, the distributor, you know, $10 a unit, and you're paying $1,000 a unit? Well, that's a big red flag. What's going on? Beyond that, even after you initially vet people, after you've gone through the background check process with them, and you're comfortable, there is still a requirement that the FCPA has, and that the DOJ, Department of Justice looks at, SEC looks at, which is ongoing monitoring. So it's great if you did some really good diligence up front in a relationship. You feel really solid about all the information. anything you could have found out, that was available to find out, you found out, and it all looked good. Okay, but now 5 years have passed and 10 years have passed. Well, you might as well have not done the initial diligence if you've not been doing some kind of ongoing monitoring. Again, it's not one size fits all. In some cases, people take looks once a year. Other times every 2 years or every 3 years, and a lot of programs actually just look at things like news media. They look for problems almost on an ongoing basis just to make sure that nothing pops up that surprises them. As far as other things you want to consider besides your due diligence, you're going to want to make sure that the third parties you work with understand the requirements of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, that you're holding them to those requirements, you're giving them copies of your policies, you're getting them to agree that they're going to follow those policies, you're training them if necessary. Again, having policies on the shelf, it's just not going to do the trick. These have to be living, breathing things where there is true in-servicing, true training, true sign-off, and oftentimes, if it's a large enough contract, you should have a right to audit, and you should use it. You should use that right and demonstrate that you're doing everything you can. That is what the DOJ, that is what the SEC is looking at. Are you really making an effort here? Sometimes, despite all the best efforts, something goes wrong. Somebody does something they shouldn't have done. And it could be without the knowledge of their senior management.
Can you actually go to the DOJ ahead of time and ask questions? Is there like a group there that will field questions? There's that dangerous thing to do.
No, actually, it's very encouraging. If you think you have a problem, you should saddle up and go over there and start talking about it, because self-reporting an issue, again, carries a lot of weight with the DOJ. That you uncovered something through your own processes and said, "Oh wow, we have a problem," and you go over there, and they're going to look at everything that we just discussed and help you resolve it. It doesn't mean there won't be an issue or a fine or a penalty, but no kidding. To put it in perspective, for a very large company, it's one thing to get a penalty for $1 million and no one gets to jail, and it's another thing to get a penalty for $500 million and a couple of people are going to jail. And literally, how seriously you take your compliance and doing the right thing, the self-reporting when there's an issue, those are the things that can make that difference.
So we're going to have to move on to the next speaker.
We're all covered.
Hold any additional thoughts that you have. And our next speaker is Sarah Bonner. She's the Senior International Trade Policy leader at the U.S. Small Business Administration. She's got an amazing background in the private industry. She has also got an education at both George Mason and Boston College. So you've got tremendous pedigree. You're involved on a daily basis helping small businesses avoid problems, and you probably see all sorts of really bizarre and strange things, and you're going to be letting us know a little bit about how to avoid those strange things, and certainly avoid the orange jumpsuit and any fines. Thank you, Senator, for speaking today. For Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I have some slides. I hope that they can be posted, and I'll try to help direct you all through them. I really wanted to help provide resources. I know that small businesses in particular have a hard time identifying where to go, and I'm hoping to cover the big picture and also direct you to where you can get help afterwards, and you're always welcome to contact me, and we'll provide our hotline information. But moving ahead, 2 slides. SBA, just as an introduction, is a cabinet level agency that directly works on helping small businesses. We provide counseling, capital, contracting, and disaster relief. The office that I am representing is the Office of International Trade. We manage our agency's export finance programs, and we coordinate interagency. I help represent small businesses in trade policy discussions and trade negotiations. And an important role that we have is helping to disseminate and share federal state export resources to make sure that SMEs have the information they need and the ability to go global. We also administer the State Trade Expansion Program, which is a competitive grant to states that many of you may benefit from your states in export promotion efforts. For those of you not in the U.S., just as a point of reference, our counterparts are Sabre in Brazil and Int'l in Mexico. We work with a lot of our counterparts and really enjoy relationships even at our small business development center level, like with Circotec and Chile. But moving forward to small business facts, one more slide. I just wanted to quickly make sure you understand that small business is big business in the U.S. 98% of our exporters are small businesses, and in 2017 they exported $461 billion. This volume keeps continuing to rise, but small businesses are not exporting at the level that we'd love to see because they don't have the necessary information, capital, and market access. I'm hoping to cover some of that information today. If we could move forward 2 slides to our focus, one more on corruption and asset misappropriation. I want to go through the resources for when you hit corruption and asset misappropriation. If you don't remember anything from this from this presentation, I just want you to remember that small businesses make a decision by where they do business based on risk, just like with customers. And I want to share some best practices about, where to do business. Engaging the U.S. government early really helps, and even if it's just a gut instinct, kind of like that reporting, it's better to come early to get help. So many times small businesses reach out too late. Also, there is insurance out there. I'm going to cover some of that. And secondly, stopfakes.gov is a great resource on asset misappropriation. I'm going to go through some case studies and support on encouraging you to prioritize your intellectual property rights and make sure you have those rights secured, that you record them, and that you have business agreements signed whenever you're sharing information about your business that could lead to counterfeiting or infringement, and that you also have strong payment controls, although I won't be going into that one. If you could move to the next slide. I really think there's 3 practice steps that small businesses need to take. They need to protect themselves really proactively and seek protection in transparency and agreements, which we'll cover, and then really effectively leverage those government resources that they pay for with their tax dollars, like our office and other interagency partners. SMEs don't have teams of lawyers to throw at problems, and I'd like to think that our hotline is one of the first places you can go when you have a problem, so we can direct you the right interagency resource or help you here. But small businesses may not have local partners everywhere or teams of lawyers, as I say, and so we really need to encourage you to reach out early. Moving forward, on the protecting yourself, a lot of small businesses don't think that they are global at all. They just have a website, and occasionally somebody from another country buys something off of eBay from them or off of their website, and suddenly they're accidental exporters. They're suddenly involved in global trade. Before that happens, at the very beginning, I really urge small businesses to secure their intellectual property rights, because if you have a website, you're already global, and people can steal your ideas. They can take the pictures off of your website if they're not watermarked, throw up another website of their own, and start exporting your faked goods into our country. And this is a sad story that I get a lot of, because small businesses haven't done anything to protect themselves. And so if you are at that stage, I encourage you to do an analysis of, do you have anything you need to secure? Even just pictures that you have taken. Go to stopfakes.gov for tips on that. And also start thinking, are there places that you need to register your intellectual property rights, whether that is in China or in other countries where there's a high rate of infringement, especially if you are manufacturing in another location or you're planning on doing business. As you go international, Again, you need to be registering in the U.S. and where you're doing work, where you're manufacturing, or where there's high infringement. And our USPTO, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office attaches are located in a lot of those important locations, and they are excellent resources to help you get free advice on what you need to do or can consider. Also, it's essential to record your rights with U.S. Customs. The website right above there, iprr.cbp.gov, is where you do that. That is primarily for copyrights and for trademarks, but you can list your information for patents. It's just it should be tied with a lot of other things. When you are going global, you want to look at, as a small business, can you use Gold Key services for your partner matching and identification, verification? U.S. Embassy folks can go out to the locations of your potential partners just to do a quick check first before you have to do travel. They can go and give you reports. It does come at a cost, but there are also grants available sometimes from your states through the STEP program that SBA funds on a competitive basis to states. There's also great professional service lists that are at the embassies around the world. Most embassies will have a list of lawyers, accountants, different representatives, and other people have highly recommended. Again, that doesn't remove all due diligence, but that removes a layer of search that you may be able to save some time and money on. Ocean shipping. Small businesses have a big problem when they're not using a licensed bonded carrier for exporting. Often their things will get ruined and they have no way to recover the cost of these cars they're exporting to Africa, for example. If you are using a licensed bonded carrier, you can help recover at least some of those funds and have help, even if you don't have a bonded carrier, from our Federal Maritime Commission. So I really encourage you to be using that resource to cover yourself, to remove that risk. Business agreements, I touched on that. I can't emphasize how important it is, even considering going to trade shows, making sure you're covered if you're going to be disclosing sensitive information. On importing, a lot of small businesses run into problems with anti-dumping orders. They don't understand that an estimate of a preliminary order can be a lot higher, or they just aren't brought up to speed that there is an anti-dumping order and they begin importing. Later, there's a lot of charges that come their way. They've already sold the goods and it's a lot of heartbreak. And so there's a phone number there for small businesses to call to check to make sure that there is not additional duties that will be assessed or could increase for goods, especially sensitive goods. Moving forward, the next thing I just wanted to just touch on was counterfeits. We, again, run into so many problems with small businesses in counterfeiting. And the challenges that they face, and maybe not having the funds to legally take down some of these folks that are infringing their goods. There are ways to do this proactively by, again, recording your rights, monitoring online, and educating your ports, the ports that you expect it to come through, or the ones near you. When there are violations, you reach out through infringement resources for e-allegations at customs so they can start targeting it. If there's some sort of fire safety issue or a consumer product safety concern, you reach out to the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There's two ways to do that, including a website where a complaint can be posted if it is reviewed and valid for the public to be able to see not to purchase something. There's exclusion orders and a specific office to help small businesses with patents to go after folks that are using their patents without permission. And again, we have those IPR attaches. This list came from helping a small business who had a really bad time. They were exporting around the world, and they didn't realize that other people were also exporting their goods around the world. It's really important to start early. And there's some other opportunities for you to be proactive with contacting the websites. And there's specific rules for some of them, like Amazon. And also counterfeiting UL marks. You can also report the problems of counterfeit UL marks to the underwriters' laboratories, and they have their own teams that can go after some of these violations. If you could move forward. Trying to go through this quickly, so leave time for questions. Oh, if we could go back one. So again, small businesses have a choice in where they're selling. And what I recommend is looking at countries where there is increased transparency and agreements, where we have relationships to help, and where you have rights. And those include U.S. free trade agreement countries, where the U.S. negotiators have already worked to try to raise the level of transparency and rules, to create a rules of the road, somewhere where you can feel more at home abroad, where the regulations are more similar and more up to standards. And when there are violations of those, we can engage around them, and there is a reason for them to help make things right. We're also excited about the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement that will be coming on soon. There's a lot of new great modernizations in there. And when there are trade agreement violations, there's a team that specifically just works on that at export.gov/tank. I used to work there, and they're really wonderful to partner with. And if it's not a trade agreement violation, they'll tell you where to go. Also, small businesses should look at members of the WTO. Again, they've agreed to some rule-based systems, and there are some rights and responsibilities. The WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement provides more transparency around what countries are actually implementing and how aggressive they are taking these responsibilities. On the next slide, I'm going to go into that. But first, there's just covering really quickly, there's also a really great best practice, the Advocacy Center. If you're going after competitions with government procurement or a government decision maker, that's a place that you contact early when you think that there could be corruption and you may need help with your competition to level the playing field. I'm going to just skip ahead really fast to a close. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that these resources existed, and on the last page there's a list of government resources to reach out to when you need help locally or where you need to report fraud. And again, please reach out early, don't wait, go with your gut. And when the issue goes to the courts, there's very little we can do, so you really need to reach out quickly and soon. And my contact information on the hotline is available on this slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Great information. Our next speaker, our last speaker, is here with us, Kendelle. Kendelle Lord is a VP of Treasury and Payment Solutions at BMO Harris Bank. You've been in banking for over 15 years. You've seen both business and commercial or retail side. You've been involved in a lot of different areas, and today you're going to be talking about kind of the World Wide Web of deceit, what the fraud landscape looks like, and how to mitigate risks no matter what size your company. So thank you so much, Kendelle.
Thanks for having me. So coming from the banking side, obviously we see a lot of fraud that happens with our clients. So this is just kind of a snapshot of different ways that, doing international business, how your business can be affected by, exactly what it says, the World Wide Web of deceit. So flashback to, 10 years ago, you probably could delete about, 80% of these. But this is kind of, as things evolve, they're evolving quicker to obviously fraudulently get, your business, attack you in different ways. So basically, half the time it's an inside job. So because they have access to your network, they have access to, click things that they shouldn't be clicking. So making sure you have policies in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So next slide. So this is just kind of a snapshot of where we're at. So obviously check fraud is on the decrease, but that's not saying it's not out there. It's more about less checks are out there. So credit card, debit card is on the down low as well. That's because of obviously the new PIN encryptions. Wire fraud is on the rise, and honestly this is probably double now just with recent information, but wire fraud is definitely what we're seeing a lot in the banking industry. ACH debit as well. As you know, wire and ACH is more time sensitive than checks. So ACH fraud is 24 hours that you need to let your bank know that you've had an ACH transaction hit your account. 62% of companies are affected by payment fraud. And the indirect cost of cybercrime is a greater concern than the dollars, according to companies. 31% of companies say they will have reputational damage. 30% of companies say they'll have loss of identity info. 28% of companies say they'll have IP, internet protocol theft. And 27% of companies say they'll have service disruption. And 21% of companies say they will have financial losses. The four most common targeting methods are what you see here. 76% of all payment fraud is committed by an outside party, but with internal knowledge. So next slide. So we kind of break it down to how you can, manage fraud. You've got your detection, prevention, recovery, and analysis, and investigation. So next slide. So detection. So implement ongoing monitoring to establish norms and spot anomalies. So routinely review payment requests. Establish a baseline for normal behavior. Use reporting to monitor patterns of electronic transfer payments and to observe any changes in the patterns. Reconcile invoices and transactions daily. I can't press enough that when a client has fraud, 9 times out of 10, they have not reconciled in months, which just blows me away. But you'd be surprised. So daily reconciliation is very important, because if you have a transaction hitting your account, you not only need to let internally people know, you need to let your bank know immediately. And then subscribe to balance and transaction threshold alerts. So obviously get with your institution, make sure you have those transaction limits in place, not only internally, but the bank can actually put transaction limits in place on the back end. So next slide. So prevention. So obviously employee training is key to preventing fraud. Just having a fraud policy in place for your new hires, as well as existing training with those employees on an ongoing basis. So develop that fraud mitigation policy, including assignment of a fraud incident manager, train the employees on fraud protection and prevention, limit access to accounts and authority to initiate and approve movement of funds, and segregation duties. Again, this is huge. In banking, we find there's this one person that can write the checks, can send the payments, who reconciles, who does all the receivables and all the payables. And it is huge to segregate that, to make sure the people that are paying are separate from the people that are receiving. Next slide. So prevention. So make fraud detection business as usual. So validate requests when receiving instructions by email or fax. Unfortunately, we kind of got to get back to the basics. When you get a request from a vendor, from an owner, you need to pick up the phone and validate that request. 9 times out of 10, your system's been hacked, and it's a vendor that says, you know what, my my wire instructions have changed. And, next thing you know, a payment's gone out and it's fraudulent. So unfortunately, we got to get back to basics and make those phone calls to validate that information. I hope somebody invents some sort of biomechanics or that you can actually approve payments, from a fingerprint or facial recognition that the two of you have that. I'm hoping a bank comes out with that. Reevaluate your dollar limits. Existing limits may be too high. So again, your bank should have limits in place on the back end as well as limits in place through your online banking. And then implement dual authentication. 9 times out of 10, when we've had wire fraud or banks had wire fraud, it's because one person was able to initiate, approve, and release that payment. So ask for secondary review to approve any fund transfer request through online banking. Secure your workstation used to send and receive financial transactions. So there's such a monster called the IBM Secure Trustee Report software. This actually helps from people hacking into your online banking, and it's free. So and make sure you keep up to date on your antivirus software, and also use firewalls. To respond to a fraud incident is key. Make sure you let internally everybody know, but also your bank know. So your bank has access to check those emails, check those phishing scams that come through, check those unusual websites. Make sure you let your bank know, because your bank has direct contact to make sure those get investigated. So assign responsibility for investigations. Establish circumstances in which external specialists should be involved, and identify who these parties are. Obtain as much detail about the allegation as possible. So the more information you have, the better. So recovery. Pull in your forensic accountant. Pull in your treasury management professional, so that would be the me of your bank, to report suspicious emails and websites to your bank. Pull in your attorney, and then conduct a follow-up review. So identifying strengths and controls which may have failed, and implement proactive fraud detection to address the methods used. Please get with your banker or your treasury person to see what your bank offers to protect yourself against fraud, against phishing fraud as well as payment fraud. So in summary, you can reduce your fraud risk by enforce a workplace fraud mitigation policy, employ ongoing monitoring to establish norms and spot abnormalities, implement employee training and controls, and adopt fraud control tools and practices to make their businesses as usual. I'll just give you a couple quick stories of what's happened, in that we're seeing in the banking industry. We had an individual who was in the hospital, and they were ordering a hospital bed for the personal use back at home to recover. We got a request into wire funds for a used hospital bed, and we knew right away that this customer would not buy a used hospital bed, so we contacted the individual's admin, and she's like, "I'm sorry, I can't bother him. He's in the hospital." We finally did, and again, this was a fraudulent email that came through requesting funds to go to obviously somebody else. We had an individual that had a manufacturer in China, and they requested for the client to change the wire instructions so that they could get their raw materials. And the payment went out. This was not at BMO Harris Bank. It was actually a different one of our competitors. But the payment went out for $300,000. And as you know, wire payments are pretty much, once they're gone, they're really hard to get back. So this individual was, $300,000 in the hole. And unfortunately, their bank could not reverse those funds once they realized, that the email was fraudulent. On the flip side, We have customers that get emails that say, hey, we've lost your banking information to send you your money. And so the customer gives out their banking information. Hey, they want their money. And next thing you know, they have fraud on their account, check fraud. So just be very careful. If somebody requests any sort of change, pick up the phone and call and contact your bank as well. So.
Thank you very much, Kendelle. Good.
Yeah.
So now we're going to be into the question and answer phase. We have several questions online and other questions. We have about 20 minutes. And so, Kendelle, why don't we keep the progress with you? You mentioned about making sure that your team knows what to do and that they're trained. Does BMO Harris Bank do training?
Yes.
I mean, how does an SME get that training? Do they just
Absolutely.
go to their bank? Maybe all of them or some of them do, and probably
Yes.
not as good as BMO.
Well, they definitely, your bank should be versed in training for fraud mitigation. We try to be advisors to our clients. It's not about what the client can give us, but actually be trusted advisors. I always love the saying that your three people that you should have in your corner as a business is your lawyer, your accountant, and your banker. So they should be actually going to you and showing you how you can mitigate fraud. So, and that's usually a combination between the banker and the treasury person.
Is the bet example that you gave, if I understand it correctly, it was actually the person at the company had a problem.
Right.
So it would seem that he might need a bed.
Right.
Somebody knew about him being unhealthy and then kind of went around and said, oh, they're vulnerable right now, and so I'm going to try and get some money. Is that the basic idea?
That is,
Okay.
the outlet calendars are being hacked.
Okay.
So it could be the owners on the plane to Chicago sends an email to the CFO that says, hey, I'm boarding the plane. Before I left, I forgot to tell you I need, $100,000 wired to X. And hopefully you have a good relationship with your owner. But there are situations where that CFO or that controller is so worried to question the owner that they'll in turn just send up the wire because they're worried that they don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. So the situation with this, the funds went out. The owner was on a boat, and sent an email to the controller to wire out funds, and it was a private bank account, not with BMO, but with a competitor. And with the private bank account, the controller was able to initiate the wire and send out the wire on its own. And that company is out $200,000.
Is the controller still with the company?
No. And it's funny because I'm not kidding you, 2 weeks before that, because we were actually bringing them over to BMO, we had the conversation with the controller. This very
Oh, seriously?
be aware of
Wow.
this, and he's still. So, yeah. But they are social engineering, so they're looking at Facebook, they're looking at, like I said, outlet calendars, situations I've heard. This hasn't happened with BMO where, hey, great having dinner with you last night. I forgot to tell you, before we left that I'd like you to send this. And they did have dinner. So, but because of Facebook, people posting things where they are,
Gotcha.
these people have access to all that.
Okay, so that's scary, actually. That's.
I don't want to scare, I want to inform.
But having the right processes and checks and balances, it emphasizes that, right?
Yes.
That a controller would feel like they shouldn't check is a problem, right, with the process, so, wow, that's.
Yeah, and it's something that where the owner or the CEO can be involved in that fraud policy in the beginning to give peace of mind to that controller, that CFO. That part of the policy is that any change in payment be obviously, recognized with the owner.
One more quick question about that issue of having our bank account information out there, right? So we give that to a lot of people. So what seems to happen is the bank will often come back to us and say, well, do you authorize this?
Right.
Like a poll. So is that what normally,
large purchase.
Is that what normally happens?
Yeah, it can. I mean, obviously, everything is so electronic now. Like, people get upset that if a check clears and it's, the check doesn't even look like their check. Well, everything's exchanging images versus a person's not looking at that check anymore. So you can definitely implement check positive pay. So that would be your check fraud prevention. You can implement ACH fraud controls. So you basically can allow certain people to debit your account with the company ID of that ACH, but then everybody else is blocked. On the wires, you just kind of have to have internal policies. The bank will let you know, though, if something's suspicious. And sometimes it's not your bank, but the receiving bank knows that, other email phishing have happened with that account information. So we'll get calls just from the receiving bank saying, hey, I don't think you meant to send this payment. It's going into your account that we're actually frozen. So there's nothing out yet that can stop wire fraud. That check fraud, yes, and ACH fraud, yes.
Okay, great to hear that there's progress being made. This is a question from, it's actually Washington, D.C., and Sarah, this I think goes to you. You started touching on this for a minute, and I couldn't quite follow which website you asked us to go to, but hopefully you can clarify this. What would you advise a U.S. energy company having a potential of entering into a business transaction with a local entity in a oil, gas, and nuclear energy rich country in Central Asia? One of the shareholders seems like he has a PEP connection, PEP, I'm not sure what that is.
Politically exposed person.
Okay, politically exposed person. He's a direct relative of the prime minister of the country. Should we kill the possibility of doing business with that entity, or is there some other thing that they should do? So sorry to give you kind of a more granular example, but it sounds like it's somebody kind of wrestling with, based on what you had said.
So I have to whatever says.
Oh, okay. Sarah, you want to start?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but the one resource that jumps out immediately is the Advocacy Center. If they are doing, it has a government decision maker. What's beautiful about the Advocacy Center at the Department of Commerce is they do a review of the whole deal that your partner has to sign a foreign corrupt practices agreement, and they give you information of what they have on the ground about it. And so it's nice to have a team, if you're selected in the U.S. interest, to receive information and be supported. And I did mention that the embassies through Gold Key can assist with some additional verifications, but I think I might bounce this back, but the Advocacy Center is export.gov/advocacy. And whenever you do deals with a government-linked individual, early before you start the tender or throughout it, I always recommend it. And I have had great success in the private world working on that.
Okay, and I think that was in the middle of one of your slides, and if anybody is interested in getting those slides, let us know, info@globalchamber.org, and we'll get that information to you. So thank you. Now that became more clear to me as well. Bill, this is kind of your area, right? That you deal with this on a daily basis, so what would you advise?
This is a great example of an industry that does have a lot of FCPA problems, and in a part of the world that does have a lot of bribery issues. But I think the last part of that question was, should we just kill the deal? Well, no, of course not. Not if it's a good deal that needs to be investigated, but it sounds like it's a substantial deal, which means it's one that you have to spend a substantial amount of time doing that due diligence. In addition to everything Sarah said, this is where you bring in a company like mine or one of the other companies that do this type of work to really drill down on these folks and find out who they are, and do they have, are they on watch lists? Do they have any criminal litigation issues? What types of civil litigation, regulatory problems? Any money they receive, especially the politically exposed person, any money they receive, what controls are you putting on them as to what they can do with that? They can't just pay that to their relative, because that's it. That's textbook. But a politically exposed person, just in a nutshell, it is someone who, either because of office that they hold now or office that they held in the past, or a relative who either holds office now or holds office in the past, or some other status, such as being one of the wealthiest people in the country, most powerful people. That is what a politically exposed person is. It's not illegal by any means to do business with a PEP, but we were talking earlier about red flags. Well, that's a red flag, and so you have to be ultra sure as to where the money's going to go. You have to tie their hands. You have to get the compliance. Definitely using the resources Sarah mentioned to bring people early in too, that this is not some secret deal you're doing. And so if the deal is worth it to you, chase it. But you're going to have to spend some money on due diligence. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Okay. Well, and what I'm hearing is beyond the due diligence, and I think all of us have done this, right? There's like a few red flags and some yellows and some greens, and now you've got to make a decision on what to do. And what I heard you say, and I think, Sarah, you said the same thing, and really you said the same thing, Kendelle, be transparent. You know, whatever you're doing, just kind of keep everything out in the open. Is
Yes.
that the answer?
Well, that's part of it.
Ultimately, what you make a decision to go ahead, and there are still some red flags.
And again, the red flags can turn green once you've done your homework. It's just, these are, the industry is a big red flag. I mean, if you go onto my LinkedIn page, you'll see how many articles I've put about major FCPA problems in that industry.
Okay, and you've done a lot of work in gaming as well.
A lot of work in gaming. Ironically, there's less problems because they're so highly regulated by not only the DOJ and the SEC. They have all their local gaming jurisdictions, Nevada, New Jersey, all around the world. But they have happened in the gaming industry as well. I can think of a few examples.
Are there certain industries, certain countries, certain types of businesses that are always like extra, you have to be extra careful?
In terms of
energy, sounds like
Transparency International, you had that on your slide, and that's a great place to consult, just literally for a quick snapshot of how countries around the world are rated in terms of basically a corruption index. So if you're you'll see right away, wow, this is a country with a lot of issues, a lot of corruption. It doesn't mean you can't do business there. Again, it just means you need to do it the right way. But again, certain industries, especially if you if you go back on my LinkedIn page and just scroll back for the last few years, the articles that I post, it's just real-time articles about companies getting in huge trouble. And you'll see, for example, oil and gas is one of them. It is what it is.
Kind of building on that, this is a question that came in, and probably the two of you should be able to tackle this one. As far as SMEs on the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, you hear a lot about these big companies running into trouble. But what about at the SME level? Is the DOJ actually going after SMEs for these kinds of issues? Do you see that? I mean, not that we're trying to get away with it, but what are, maybe the better question would be, from an SME perspective, where are the problem points for FCPA?
You want to go first, Sarah, or would you like me to?
I think it'd be better if you go first, because I'm trying to think back of the things that have come in.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. It's really the conduct that DOJ is going after, and I think that an SME would be ill-advised to think, well, it's the big fish they want. I mean, that sells newspapers and all that, but I think the DOJ is pretty pure of heart in that they're going after the conduct. And so if you're a $5 million a year business that lays down a bribe somewhere and you're caught, you are going to have big problems. They're not just going to go after the multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean, those are the ones you read about, the multi-billion-dollar companies. But if you look at, for example, the DOJ press releases, which come out almost daily, you'll see a lot of much smaller stuff. Sometimes in the medical field, by the way.
Okay.
Quite a few.
So there is a news feed from the DOJ.
Yeah.
And is it on
SEC
FCPA,
as well,
or is it more general? Or?
No, it's more general, but one only need look at that news feed every day and realize that this whole topic, not just FCPA, but fraud in general, every day there's something from the DOJ. There's a few other issues not fraud related, but every day there's something.
Gotcha.
I'd just like to jump in and say that the government doesn't give a pass to SMEs. And if there's fraud or wrongdoing, even I noted the anti-dumping stuff, I mean, it can be devastating. And no matter how hard I work to try to make things go away, if it was just a mistake, you know, self-report, get help, and don't take this as, you know, you're small, no one's going to care. It really does count. It does matter to stay on top of your compliance.
So that sounds good. So it sounds like like kind of going around the table now. Is there anything else that we should know about, or any kind of closing statements that you'd like to make? Bill, you want to?
Yeah, probably my closing statement again would be to familiarize yourself with the fraud landscape, to whether it's what I talked about, FCPA, or these other areas. Remember, if there's one thing you should know for sure when you use people overseas, intermediaries, contracts, distributors, willful blindness doesn't help. You can't just look the other way and say, well, I don't know, I pay him, you know, $100,000 a month, and he gets the job done. I don't know what he does with money. That
doesn't work.
That'll get you in that orange jumpsuit. Yeah.
Gotcha. Sarah, anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, thanks for inviting me, and please reach out to the government early and self-report and seek help, especially before it goes to the courts, because there's little we can do at that stage.
We've been talking really, I think, mainly from a U.S. law perspective, although you touched on some additional laws that are around there. If there's companies out there today that are in any country and they're doing business in the U.S., are they vulnerable to U.S. law while they're doing business in the U.S.? Presumably they are, but I wanted to hear back. So do they get in trouble?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely, and they'll also get in trouble in their home jurisdiction
if the law is,
yeah, which is almost now. I mean, maybe the answer 15 years ago would have been different, but now almost everybody's got some version of the FCPA.
Mostly universal.
Yeah,
gotcha. Kendelle, anything else other than let's bank at BMO Harris Bank, right? But you're available to talk to anybody regarding these issues.
You know, it's one of those things where, like I said, we're trusted advisors, so it's not about people banking with us. It's about offering advice and educating. So definitely reach out and let me know if you have any questions.
Fantastic. You guys are great resource, and all the information will be available. We'll likely have a blog post with the video of this conversation out in the next week or two, so stay tuned for that. In terms of what's coming up next for Global Chamber, from today, I believe on Tuesday, we have the ambassador for the country of Georgia for the U.S. will be in Baltimore on Inner Harbor at the Maryland Department of Commerce at a Global Chamber event, and it'll be a Globinar. So if you're looking at the possibilities of getting involved with either exporting or importing or foreign direct investment with the country of Georgia, there's a lot of infrastructure projects there, probably on the energy side as well. Check out the ambassador on Tuesday. And then we have many small businesses use a software called ACT. Or we're familiar with that. You probably know about ACT for sure, and certainly I have. They are actually headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona, lo and behold, and they're a member of Global Chamber, and their CEO is speaking on the 7th about how to leverage the fact that you've got all these customers. Hopefully most of them are happy. How do you leverage that for more customers? And so he'll be talking about, I'm sure, how to use the software, but also more holistically, how do you do that? And then on the 8th, somebody else at SwiftPage, and the name of the company is SwiftPage, is going to be doing that seminar in Spanish. So English, Spanish, 7th to 8th, growing your business. So growing your business, avoiding the fraud, and new opportunities around the world, like in the country of Georgia. That's what we're all about. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, speakers. We'll see you next time. Take care.